We came down because I heard about the exhibition and the project to come up with something like a tapestry to try and remember what the town did and the people from the town did during the First World War.
And what did you find out about Whitchurch and your connection with it?
Well, Whitchurch suffered quite badly really in terms of the people that it lost during the war. So there were something like 64 men that died during the war, which is, for the population of the town at the time, was quite a lot. And some families suffered more than most. You know, the tragedy of the Rumbolds, who lost 3 brothers, and other people who lost sons and son-in-laws. So it's when you start to look at the stories of the people that are on there, not just the names, because you get the name and you get a sense of where they might have fought, but when you start to delve into the family lives, what they did before, you know, these weren't professional soldiers, these were people who were milkmen and grocers, and yet they were sent out to probably the bloodiest conflict the world's ever seen.
Now, in our church at All Hallows, we have a list of names there. Have you been looking at that?
Yeah, well, what I did is my wife actually from Whitchurch, and her her great-grandfather, Edward Cross, is one of the men listed. So after a Remembrance Day service a few years ago, I decided to try and find out a bit more about him. And in doing that, the project snowballed to the fact now that I'm sort of researching all 64 men with hopefully I have the idea to do something with that in the near future, an exhibition or a book.
What did you find out about was it great-grandfather?
It's a bit of a sad story really. Edward Cross, he was a worker on the railway for the London and South West Railways, and he joined the army in 1915, went to France probably at the beginning of 1917, and went through the Battle of Passchendaele, which was one of the worst battles of the war. Following that, in the bad winter of 1917 and 1918, he got frostbite, and as a result was sent home to recover on leave. And during that time, he was able to, how do we say this, make another baby with his wife before being sent back to the front. And just a couple of months after being sent back to France, he was killed. So 6 months later, his daughter, who was called Myrtle Louisa Cross, was born, and that's my wife's grandmother. So without him actually coming back from France and Belgium with his injuries, she would have never been born, and therefore her daughter and her granddaughter, my wife, would never have been born, and I'd have never met her, and we'd have never had our 2 lovely children. So just that coincidence that he was stuck out there, got frostbite and came back, and was able to have another baby before he died.
A nice happy ending to all of that.
Yeah. It's nice to know. I guess that's part of remembering them. You know what they did. These was just ordinary people. You know, they weren't professional soldiers. Could have been you. It could have been me having to do this. You know, they were conscripted or they volunteered eagerly to go and do this, probably not knowing what they were going to. And it pays to remember them, I think.
Well, thank you very much for that story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Grandad, Thomas Kersop, joined up at 40, and he was killed at 41 at the Battle of Arras. I didn't know him because my mum was 11 when he died. But it made the First World War made things harder for the women. Now, Grandma was always very able, and she became a chief cashier at their co-op, and her and Mum did well. They worked hard, and Mum joined in, and Mum went to teacher training college. So that was a success story.
Are they from the Whitchurch area?
No, I am. I was born and bred here, but my mum, who was a Geordie, met my dad, who was Whitchurch born and bred at Blackpool. My granddad apparently was not a swearing man, and he wrote about being up to his A above E in mud. That's how they said, because he wouldn't have said, and that's how they realised it was Arras. But of course, as my mum said, 3 months over here, there, and he was dead. A few years ago, it was in the papers, they found some skeletons, and although my granddad officially has no known grave, we were invited, I contacted the Lincolnshires, and we were invited to go over to Arras where they interred the bones. It was the same day as the Queen Mother's funeral. And we're 99% certain that one of those skeletons is my granddad, because they were all buried together, and in linked arms, and they think it was possibly where they brought the bodies, but they just had to be buried. Then they couldn't retrieve them. So that's the story of Grandad. I have managed to get him in print in a Dutch book, because when we went over to Aris for a few years ago, and there was a Dutch film crew doing a documentary on the First World War, and they took Grandad's photo and my information, and I can't read it because it's in Dutch, but I've got him in print, and that's my way of saying, well, come on, we've got to pull together to look after our lads.